Look around you. We live in a world that is obsessed with the finish line. We celebrate the trophy, the launch, the viral video, and the sudden success. We love the applause. But the applause only happens at the stadium when the game is won. Nobody applauds the person running alone on a cold morning at 500 a.m. There's a fundamental truth about human behavior that we often ignore because it feels uncomfortable. No one is your friend until you win. Now, this doesn't mean people are inherently bad or malicious. It means that human beings are naturally drawn to clarity, certainty, and results. When you are grinding in silence, you are working on a vision that exists only inside your head. To the rest of the world, you are a question mark. You are unproven. And it takes an immense amount of energy for people to invest their belief into a question mark. When you are in the silence phase, you are testing your own hypothesis. You are building the foundation. But because there is no structure visible above the ground yet, people cannot see what you are building. They don't support you not because they hate you, but because they simply do not understand what you are doing. They cannot validate what isn't there. Winning changes everything because winning provides the proof. When you win, your vision becomes tangible. It becomes a reality they can finally see, touch, and understand. Suddenly, the crowd appears. The people who ignored your calls are now congratulating you. The people who doubted you now say they always knew you had it in them. It is easy to become cynical when this happens. It is easy to say, where were you when I was struggling? But if we want to be mature creators, leaders, and builders, we have to look at this with empathy. The crowd doesn't join you in the dark because the dark is scary and uncertain. They join you in the light because the light is safe. Winning makes you a safe bet. Therefore, the silence is not a punishment, it is a filter. The time you spend grinding in silence is the most important period of your journey because it answers one critical question: why are you doing this? If you are doing it only for the applause of others, you will quit in the silence because there is no applause there. But if you are doing it because you deeply care about the problem you are solving, the silence becomes your sanctuary. It is where your deep work happens. Do not resent the silence, and do not resent the people who only show up at the finish line. Accept that human connection requires proof. Keep your head down, trust your process, and build. Let your execution be your noise, and let your eventual victory be the bridge that finally connects your inner vision to the rest of the world. Fev keynotes of the speech, The Invisibility of Vision. People cannot easily support or validate a vision that only exists in your mind. They require tangible proof to understand your direction. The safety of success, human beings are naturally drawn to certainty. People show up when you win because success makes you a safe and predictable bet to support. Silence is a filter. The period of unacknowledged, quiet hard work acts as a test of true, intrinsic motivation. It filters out those who only crave external validation. Empathy over cynicism. Instead of resenting those who only appear after a victory, realize it is standard human behavior to seek clarity over confusion. The true purpose of grinding. The quiet phase is where deep foundational skills are built without the distraction of public expectation or critique. The invisibility of vision is perhaps the most profound psychological barrier that any creator, entrepreneur, or builder must confront when they choose to step away from the crowd and grind in silence. When you embark on a new journey, when you decide to build a business, master a skill, or create something that has never existed before, you are operating entirely on an internal blueprint. You can see the final product clearly. You know what the structure looks like, you understand its value, and you can feel the impact it will have on the world. But to everyone outside of your own mind, that vision is entirely invisible. Human beings, by our very evolutionary design, are deeply visual and evidence-based creatures. We trust what we can see, we measure what we can touch, and we validate what has already been proven to work. When you ask people to believe in you during the silent phase of your journey, you are not just asking for their encouragement. You are asking them to leap into a void of uncertainty with you. You are asking them to spend their emotional energy, their time, or their attention on a concept that currently has zero marketplace reality. This is why the lack of support in the beginning is rarely driven by malice or hatred. It is driven by the simple fact that people lack the imagination or the context to see what is hidden inside your head. To the rest of the world, a person working in silence on an unproven idea does not look like a visionary genius. They look like a question mark. They look like someone who might be wasting their time, chasing a pipe dream, or indulging in a delusion. Because society is hardwired to look for metrics, milestones, and physical evidence, your silent work is essentially non-existent to them. They cannot clap for a foundation that is buried deep underground. They cannot celebrate a chapter of a book that hasn't been printed or a feature of an app that hasn't been coded. This creates a profound disconnect between the builder and the audience. The builder feels isolated, ignored, and lonely, wondering why the people around them cannot see the obvious brilliance of the path they are on. But the audience is simply waiting for reality to catch up with the imagination. They require tangible proof to understand your direction because human nature seeks safety and clarity. We do not invest our faith in confusion or ambiguity. When you are in the dark, you are asking people to trust the intangible, which goes against our natural instinct to seek predictability. It takes an immense amount of cognitive energy for an outsider to look at a blank canvas or a messy, chaotic prototype and see the masterpiece that will exist 3 years from now. Most people simply do not have the bandwidth or the perspective to do that. Therefore, the invisibility of your vision means that the burden of belief rests entirely on your own shoulders. Expecting the world to validate you before you have produced a result is a fundamental misunderstanding of how human belief works. The world does not give credit in advance. It demands a proof of concept. The silent grind is the process of translating that invisible internal spark into a visible external reality. Until that translation is complete, you must accept that you will walk alone, fueled not by the collective agreement of the crowd, but by the private certainty of your own conviction. Human beings are naturally drawn to certainty, and this fundamental trait of human psychology explains why the crowd only appears once the finish line has been crossed. To understand why no one is your friend until you win, you have to look at the deeply ingrained human instinct to seek safety, predictability, and alignment with success. From an evolutionary perspective, aligning ourselves with unproven, risky, or ambiguous ventures is dangerous. It requires a high expenditure of social, emotional, and sometimes financial capital with absolutely no guarantee of a return. When you are grinding in silence, you represent a statistical risk. You are an unpredictable variable in a world that thrives on stability. Therefore, when people distance themselves from you during your building phase, they are not necessarily rejecting you as a person. They are rejecting the discomfort of your uncertainty. They are choosing the path of least resistance, which is to wait and see. People show up when you win because success completely changes the calculus of association. A victory provides an immediate, undeniable source of safety. It removes all the guesswork, all the risk, and all the ambiguity that defined your silent years. Suddenly, supporting you doesn't require faith, imagination, or courage. It only requires eyes to see what is already there. Winning makes you a safe bet. When you become a safe bet, associating with you carries an immediate social premium. People want to be near the light because the light reflects positively on them. It validates their own sense of judgment to align with a winner. This is why the individuals who could not find 5 minutes to return your phone calls when you were struggling suddenly find hours to celebrate your achievements once you have made it. The victory provides a clear, pre-packaged narrative that requires zero effort for them to understand or explain to others. It is incredibly easy to cheer for a champion because society has already established a universal code for celebrating success. There is no social cost to applauding a winner. In fact, there is only social credit to be gained. This behavior is a direct reflection of how human networks function. We naturally gravitate towards centers of gravity that offer value, stability, and prestige. When you are in the trenches, you are a consumer of energy. You need encouragement, resources, and patience. But when you win, you become a producer of energy. You offer status, inspiration, and validation to those around you. The crowd arrives at the finish line because they are drawn to the harvest, not the labor of planting. Recognizing this truth is not a reason to become cynical or resentful. Rather, it is a tool for profound intellectual and emotional clarity. When you realize that people are just seeking safety and predictability, you stop expecting the crowd to behave like pioneers. You stop expecting them to have the stomach for the dark, chaotic, and messy phases of creation. You accept that it is standard human behavior to prefer the comfort of a finished product over the anxiety of a work in progress. This understanding frees you from the burden of seeking early approval. It allows you to look at the sudden influx of friends and supporters not as a betrayal of their past silence, but as a natural law of human physics. Light attracts and success secures. By accepting that human connection often requires the safety of a proven result, you can focus entirely on executing your work, knowing that the crowd's current absence is merely a temporary state that will inevitably change the moment the uncertainty of your struggle transforms into the absolute certainty of your victory. The period of unacknowledged, quiet hard work acts as a profound psychological test of true, intrinsic motivation, operating as a necessary filter that separates those who merely crave the destination from those who are truly committed to the journey. When you are forced to work in the shadows, stripped of public applause, like validation or immediate financial reward, you are left alone with a single unavoidable question: why are you doing this? In a hyper-connected world where we are conditioned to expect instant gratification and constant social feedback, silence feels unnatural. It feels like a vacuum. Most people enter a creative or entrepreneurial pursuit fueled by the romantic fantasy of the end result, the fame, the wealth, the title, or the public admiration. But the fantasy cannot survive the silence. When you realize that the world isn't watching, that nobody cares about your daily discipline, and that your sleepless nights are completely invisible to the public, the superficial desire for applause quickly burns out. If your only fuel was the expectation of external praise, the silence becomes intolerable, and you will inevitably quit. This is precisely why the silence is not a punishment, but a filter. It is a merciless mechanism that weeds out the tourists and protects the purists. The tourists are those who want the status of being a creator or a leader without enduring the isolation required to become one. The filter ensures that only those with a deep, obsessive, and intrinsic love for the craft itself make it through to the other side. When you are in this filter, you are forced to develop a completely different relationship with your work. You can no longer rely on the cheap dopamine hits of public approval to get you out of bed in the morning. Instead, you have to find joy in the mundane details of execution. You have to fall in love with the frustration of a problem that hasn't been solved yet. You have to derive satisfaction from the simple act of showing up and putting in the hours, completely independent of whether anyone ever notices. This process fundamentally transforms your character. It builds a rare kind of psychological resilience that cannot be developed in the spotlight. When you learn to validate yourself, you become dangerous because you are no longer dependent on the opinions of the crowd. The crowd cannot break your spirit by ignoring you because you didn't ask for their permission to start in the first place. This filtering process is also what protects the integrity of whatever it is you are building. Great work requires deep, uninterrupted focus, and public attention is often a distraction disguised as a reward. If the spotlight shines on you too early, you stop focusing on the product and start focusing on managing the expectations of the audience. You become cautious, conservative, and eager to please, which kills true innovation. The silence gives you the creative freedom to fail, to experiment, to make terrible mistakes, and to pivot without the embarrassing burden of public scrutiny. It allows you to build a foundation that is sturdy enough to support the weight of future success. Therefore, the isolation of the silent grind should be embraced as a critical rite of passage. It is the arena where your true intentions are tested and your vanity is stripped away. If you can survive the quiet phase without losing your drive, you have proven to yourself that your ambition is authentic. You emerge from the filter not just as someone who wants to win, but as someone who has earned the right to win through the quiet, uncompromising mastery of their own discipline. Instead of resenting those who only appear after a victory, a mature leader or creator must realize that seeking clarity over confusion is standard human behavior, allowing us to replace bitterness with a profound sense of empathy. When the breakthrough finally happens and the crowd suddenly rushes in, it is incredibly easy to become cynical. The human ego naturally wants to guard its pain and remember the names of everyone who didn't answer a text message, who skipped a launch party, or who smiled politely while thinking the idea would fail. It feels justified to look at the sudden influx of attention and think of it as superficial, fake, or hypocritical. But adopting a posture of resentment is an intellectual trap that ultimately poisons the victory itself. To transcend this bitterness, we have to look at human behavior through a lens of structural empathy rather than emotional entitlement. The people who ignored you when you were struggling were not actively plotting your demise. They were simply living their own complex, exhausting, and demanding lives. The average person has a limited amount of emotional bandwidth and cognitive energy. They are dealing with their own anxieties, their own financial pressures, and their own hidden struggles. They do not have the surplus energy required to decode your unfinished thoughts or to sit with you in the anxiety of your creative chaos. Expecting the world to pause its own survival to nurture your unproven ambition is an unfair demand. When you understand that people naturally gravitate toward clarity because confusion requires too much effort to process, the resentment evaporates. The crowd doesn't avoid the dark because they hate the person standing in it. They avoid the dark because humans are fundamentally hardwired to seek safety, warmth, and visibility. They join you in the light because the light is where everything makes sense. This perspective shift changes how you view human relationships entirely. It allows you to welcome the newcomers at the finish line without judging them for missing the start. It teaches you that their late arrival is not a moral failing on their part, but a natural law of human physics. Light attracts and success organizes human behavior. When you look at the crowd with empathy rather than cynicism, you realize that their support now is genuine in its own way. It is just based on a different set of parameters. They are supporting a finished, valuable reality, which is exactly what they are supposed to do. This insight protects your mental peace because it stops you from carrying a heavy list of grievances into your future. Carrying old resentments into new success is like driving a fast car while staring constantly in the rearview mirror. It ensures an inevitable crash. Empathy acts as a shield that keeps your success clean, light, and focused on the future. Furthermore, this realization forces you to take responsibility for your own narrative. If people need clarity to connect, then your job as a builder is to create that clarity through your execution, not to complain that they can't see in the dark. It frees you from the exhausting cycle of trying to prove people wrong, shifting your focus entirely to proving your own vision right. By replacing the bitter desire for revenge with a calm, empathetic understanding of human design, you can appreciate the applause for exactly what it is. A natural human response to a job well done, offered by people who simply waited for the dust to settle before they stepped into the arena. The quiet phase of any deep pursuit is where your most foundational skills are forged, completely shielded from the paralyzing weight of public expectation or premature critique. When we observe highly successful individuals at the peak of their powers, we are looking at a polished, refined performance. We see the effortless execution, the seamless delivery, and the brilliant decision-making. But we often fail to recognize that this effortlessness is a direct product of the hundreds of hours spent in complete isolation, where mistakes carried no public cost and experimentation had no external penalty. The silence provides an irreplaceable sanctuary for raw development. In the early stages of mastering a craft, building a business, or developing a unique voice, your work is inevitably going to be deeply flawed, messy, and inconsistent. If you are forced to display this unrefined work to the public too early, You open yourself up to the premature critique of an audience that does not understand your process. Public critique at the inception stage is incredibly dangerous because it forces you to become defensive. You stop focusing on how to make the work truly great, and you start focusing on how to make the work acceptable to the crowd. You begin to smooth over the rough, eccentric edges of your ideas to avoid criticism, which inadvertently destroys the very originality that would have made your work spectacular in the long run. The silence protects you from this trap. It grants you the ultimate luxury of creative freedom, the permission to fail terribly, repeatedly, and privately. When nobody is watching, a failed attempt is not an embarrassing public setback. It is simply a data point. It is a necessary lesson that you absorb, analyze, and use to iterate for the next attempt. This private feedback loop allows you to build a standard of excellence that is driven by your own internal compass rather than the shifting whims of public approval. You learn to diagnose your own weaknesses and fortify your skills without the distortion of external noise. Furthermore, working without the burden of public expectation allows you to develop deep focus. When an audience is watching, a subtle psychological shift occurs where you begin to perform the act of working rather than doing the actual work. You become hyper-aware of how you are perceived, which consumes valuable cognitive energy that should be directed entirely toward solving the complex problems in front of you. The silent grind eliminates this performance anxiety. It allows you to immerse yourself completely in the deep work state, where hours can disappear into perfecting a single line of code, refining a single paragraph, or troubleshooting a mechanical flaw. This uninterrupted incubation period is where real competence is built. It is where you move from conscious effort to unconscious mastery. By the time the world finally notices you, the skills you developed in the dark have become second nature. You are no longer guessing, you are executing with absolute certainty. The confidence you display in public is not an act. It is the natural byproduct of having already survived your own private testing ground. Therefore, the absence of an audience in the beginning should not be viewed as a disadvantage or a lack of support, but as a protective barrier. It is a period of grace that allows you to grow your roots deep into the ground before the tree is forced to withstand the harsh winds of public scrutiny and high stakes. The quiet phase ensures that when the spotlight finally finds you, it reveals a structure built on solid rock, fully capable of standing tall under the immense pressure of your inevitable success. Ultimately, the journey of grinding in silence is not a tragedy of neglect, but a triumph of character. It is the sacred space where the invisible becomes visible, where risk transforms into certainty, and where your true motivations are tested and refined. When you accept that the world requires proof before it offers partnership, you stop fighting human nature and start mastering your own. Do not resent the quiet and do not fear the isolation. The crowd will arrive when the victory is secure, but the victory is only ever secure because of what you did when the stadium was completely empty. Trust the silence, build your foundation, and let your execution be the only voice you need.